Hopefully I won't need a microphone as I say. Everything sound okay? Can you hear me okay? All right, I've been 25 years in radio, so I've got that voice, I guess. But my dad has been preaching for 65 years this year, so I got that from him too also. I'm James Metcalf, and I'm the chief guide at the Polk County History Museum. I do a lot of local history programs in various different places. Last year I did 33 altogether in places such as the DAR and the Lions Club and several historical associations. I do one a month at the meeting place every third Friday morning. If you want to come, and you want to be a senior citizen, just come. You do have to call in if you want lunch, but just come and enjoy it.
If watch wasn't that way, we don't want to be, we just.
All right, well, but my ancestry here in Polk County, I had 5 ancestors here in the Polk County area that was either here during the Revolution or shortly after the Revolution. And my roots go way back, and I just love Polk County history. I don't have any kind of degree or any kind of college training in this. This is just all that comes from my heart. And this is the first time I've been to Brights Creek, first time I've done a program on Brights Creek. So I had to learn a lot of stuff about Brights Creek this week with all our various books and articles we have at the museum. And hopefully I'll be able to tell you something about your community that you never heard before. And of course, the history of the Brights Creek community. The Cherokee, of course, were the first residents here in this area of western North Carolina. They stretched from the Catawba Nation, which was in Charlotte. You know, today in Kings Mountain, the Catawba and the Cherokee are fighting over a casino. That's because it was right all the way into Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina. So the Cherokee were really one of the most knowledgeable tribes, and they were one of the tribes that assimilated into the European style first, and really a lot of them adopted the European religions in those early days. But before the Revolution, they lived here, and North Carolina at the time was one of the most underdeveloped colonies. South Carolina, of course, had Charleston, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, Maryland. They were all becoming very developed out of the wilderness, but North Carolina was not. Not a lot of people were living in North Carolina. So the royal governor started giving out land grants to settlers. And if they wanted to be in the eastern part of North Carolina, which was developed, they got a small grant. If they wanted to come to western North Carolina, where very few white people lived, they got a large grant. And that's when people started coming, just before the Revolutionary War. And at this time, the Cherokee, of course, and the governor were kind of disputing about the land. So Governor William Tryon, New Bern, of course, was the capital at that time, made a treaty with the Cherokee, which pushed them down to the mountain ranges of western North Carolina. This area of Polk County, the mountains, were the end of white man's land at the time of the Revolution. The Cherokee lands began here in the mountain ranges of White Oak Mountain, Tryon Peak, and the Greenville-Spartanburg County line. That was Cherokee territory. So this was the frontier at the time. And so the Cherokee lived in the mountains at that time, and the white settlers lived in the lower parts of the mountains. Now, I read a story when I was researching Brights Creek. I read a story that there was a little valley somewhere here on what used to be called the Deep Gap Farms that they called the Fluters Valley, Fluters Hollow. Everybody ever heard of that? No? Fluter, like a flute. And the story was that a Cherokee woman carved a flute out of wood, and her warrior husband never returned, and she whistled that flute throughout eternity, and you could hear that wherever that was. This was a person whose grandparents had a farm here on the mountain here somewhere. I'm not sure which hollow or valley that was, but he said he never did hear, as a kid, he never did hear the flute because they probably made too much noise to hear it. But that's the legend and the ghost story that's here. Maybe you never had heard of before. Anybody ever heard of Fluters Valley or Fluters Hollow? I don't know. Yeah, but anyway, that's one of the legends about the Cherokee. And of course, when the Revolutionary War began, the British instigated the Cherokee, who were primarily pretty peaceful at that time, to fight against the Patriot families in the area. And Colonel Ambrose Mills was one of the leader of the local loyalists, if you're British, or Tories if you're not British. And they instigated the Cherokees to to go out and massacre families. They did some very terrible things, like tomahawk a woman's head, or stomp a baby's head in on the ground, and they did some terrible, terrible things. But one of the leaders of the Cherokee was a guy named I forgot his last name, but Wild Bill. Anyway, he was half Powhatan Indian, and he led them to do these terrible things. And he was interested more in stealing the horses and livestock in Wild Bill Barton, I believe it was, and things like that. He actually, after the Revolutionary War, got arrested down in the Green Creek area as a horse thief and taken to jail, where somebody whose family got killed by these Indians that were under him, killed at the Greenville County Jail. And he was killed. But I believe he was the one that really got these Indians to do terrible things. Now, one of the first families that lived here in this valley here was the Stepp family. And Mrs. Stepp, I believe her name was Mary, if I get the first. I don't do a lot of notes. I just kind of, if I had my notes, I would remember the person's last name sometimes. But Mary Stepp, and her father was Ambrose Mills, who was the colonel of the Loyalists. Ambrose Mills, the rest of the story, he later was hung at Kings Mountain. He was captured at Kings Mountain and hung, but he led the Tories here in the area. But the Mills and Stepps and the Brownies were some of the first pioneers in here. But there is a diary that goes back to 1780, and this is from a British soldier named Lieutenant Anthony Allaire. Now you have to realize most of the British that fought for the British were North Carolina residents. They were not British soldiers. He was from New York, and he was sent down here to work for Ferguson, who was a British soldier, and to fight the Patriots down here. But it's interesting. He wrote a diary several months before Kings Mountain, and he has one of the great texts. But he mentions this area of Wrights Creek today in his diary. And as you can read, Thursday, the 28th, this was September 28th, 1780. Got in motion at 5 o'clock in the morning, marched 7 miles to Mountain Creek, forded it, although very difficult. Continued on about a mile farther to Twitty Ford of the Broad River, this is Rutherford County, and took up our ground on its banks. At 6 o'clock in the evening, got in motion, forded the river, marched 2 miles to McDaniels, forded Green River. All of Green River, Polk County was part of Rutherford County at that time, but all the Green River is in Polk County, so you know he's in Polk County here. Forded it and marched 2 miles farther, halted on the road, laid our arms till 4 o'clock the next morning. Friday the 29th. Now, they know that the James Stepp plantation was here in the Wrights Creek area. Friday the 29th. We then, at that early hour, moved on 3 miles to one James Stepp's plantation and halted. This man has been very unfortunate in his family. His wife, who was a very decent woman, was caught by the Indians about 12 months past. They scalped and tomahawked her several times in the head and treated the infant she had in her arms in a most inhuman and savage manner. They mashed its head in such a manner that its recovery is truly astonishing. Isn't that interesting? That she survived and the child survived. But this poor, unhappy woman seems most to regret is the loss of her oldest son whom the savages took. She now remains in a state of uncertainty, not having heard from him since. Saturday the 30th, lay at James Stepp's with an expectation of intercepting Colonel Clark on his return to the mountains. But he was prudent enough to take another route. And of course, that was the 30th of September. October the 7th is when the Battle of Kings Mountain took place. And Allaire and most all of the British Army was either killed, wounded, or arrested at the time. They captured Lieutenant Allaire and also the Ambrose Mills we talk about, and they sentenced 40 of these British loyalists to death by hanging. They ended up paroling most of them and only hung 8, including Colonel Ambrose Mills, which was Miss Stepp's father. So that was the Battle of Kings Mountain. So the revolution took place, and after the revolution, there were more settlers that came into the area. Many of them were Revolutionary War veterans like my ancestors received land grants. We received, the Metcalfs received a 640-acre land grant in the corner where I live of Polk County. We're at the top of the mountain, Saluda. They also received land grants in Georgia because they fought in Georgia as well. A lot of these land grants went into western North Carolina because, once again, they pushed the Indians back. They pushed the Cherokee back. This was the original Cherokee territory, but they pushed them back farther into the mountains. Shortly after the Revolutionary War, I don't know if that was punishment for them fighting with the British or not, and then they formed Buncombe County. This would be Buncombe County today. This is Henderson County today, but Buncombe County was part of, Buncombe County stretched all the way down to the South Carolina line at the time and to the edge of Rutherford County. And as you can see, if you look at a Polk County map today, this is the edge of Polk County today, but it dips down where I live right here. It dips down a little bit now instead of going straight across like it once did. But they started moving into the Buncombe County area, and so they really needed some good roads to go across the mountains. One of those roads that they built was right through this area here, which is the Mills Gap Road that you see here on this map. Now this is the 1808 map of Buncombe County, and you see this road that comes through here, that's got to be what we call Hobbart's Cove Road today, because it's exactly the same. And that's what I gathered, that Hobbart's Cove was one of the earlier roads that came through here. But the early settlers, of course, moved here in the Wrights Creek area, and many of them lived along the Mills Gap Road. And these roads were very important because they gave a nice, easy route through the mountains. However, they were no easy way like they are today. Now, how many Methodists we got here today? Methodists. We got a few. You know who this guy is, right? Right? Francis Asbury, Reverend Francis Asbury. He was one of the earliest circuit riding evangelists in Western North Carolina. And he really built up the Methodist Church in the United States, because he would go and he would ordain people and help start churches and things like that. Well, he came right through the mountains here on Mills Gap Road. Did you know that? Anybody know that? And if you look at censuses of the 1800s, you'll see a lot of Asbury, such and such, Asbury for the first name, or Frank Asbury for the first and middle name. A lot of people were named after him. I guess if they were especially Methodists, they were. But Francis Asbury, in his diary, wrote about coming across this mountain right here. And this was, I think, 1807. Shortly after the Revolutionary War, 1807. It was still quite wilderness here. And this is what he said in his diary. A camp meeting on Turkey Creek, that was up around Asheville. On Sunday, he preached to a congregation of about 500 people, and the Spirit of the Lord was present, and a few souls professed converting race. October 1st, the bishop visit at Samuel Edney's. Everybody know where Edneyville is? That's named after the Edney family. Samuel Edney was an early preacher in Henderson County. He left Buncombe by Mills Gap, and thus describes his rough experiences. I rode, I walked, I sweated, I trembled, and my old knees failed. That sounds like an old person, don't it? And here are gullies and rocks and precipices. We came upon the Green River, crossed, and then hobbled and crippled along to Martin Edwards, a local preacher. The Edwards family lived in the Mill Springs area, had a long line of Methodist preachers in their family, and they started probably the second or third church in Polk County. Today it's called Bethlehem Methodist Church, but it was named different names during the years, but it started in the log cabin at the Edwards family. And this Martin Edwards had the distinction of being ordained by Reverend Asbury. And that was quite an honor. And then of course, I said, a long line of preachers came backwards. I tell everybody in my family I come from a long line of preachers and moonshiners. But there's a lot of preachers in the Edwards family. And when they built Highway 74, they had to take down the old Edwards homestead that was in the middle of the path of 74. They sold it to somebody from out of state that rebuilt it in Hunt Country. And it's a guest house. The guy was coming to our museum before, but that's where they lived, and that's where the first church was started also, the first Methodist church that Asbury talked about. So can you imagine that? If you're a Methodist, you probably grew up learning about this guy, and he came right through Mills Gap here. Isn't that interesting? All right. So early settler families that were here in the Wrights Creek area were people like Amos Arledge, and Robert Walker was supposed to be, several accounts say that he was the first person that lived here in this valley. There was the Bradley family and the Huggins family. Now, I know that the Bradleys were around before the Revolutionary War. One of my ancestors' daughters married a Bradley, and the Arledges came from Fairfield County in the early 1800s. And Robert Walker, who is probably the most important person in the history of Wrights Creek, he came in that area also. So they ended up in this community. They had a store, a school, a church, post office, a gristmill. Most of them were run by the first Robert Walker that came here. Now, in the late 1800s, they formed a post office. Would you like to have a post office up here? There's very few post offices in Polk County, but they had a post office here, and they named it Wrights Creek Post Office from 1874 to 1933. It was also called Walker's Post Office, and the little village that they called here, you would get a postmark from Walker, North Carolina. Here, if you mailed a letter from here, it would be postmarked Walker, North Carolina. And I think we might have one of those at the museum. But Robert Walker's son, in the mid-1800s, began running the store, the mill, and the post office. And I think that's, well, here's a, you know, the pioneers here, they used a lot of wooden tools. We have this in our museum. This was a tool used up here at Wrights Creek. It was, you know, a saw. I don't know if you call it a band saw or whatever, but very primitive tools that they used. And that's a little thing. But anyway, in 1847, Polk County was formed. And this right here is the old Indian line, as you can see here, the Green River, and the Mills Gap Road is up here. So around here is Wrights Creek area, you know. And as you can see, this was the old Indian line. It's what it says here on, somewhere in here anyway. It says the old Indian line anyway. The old Indian line, which at that time was the Henderson County part of Polk County. The rest of this was Rutherford County. So in 1847, a man named Columbus Mills, who the town of Columbus is named after, was in the state legislature. He was a politician that was in the state senate, state legislature. He ran for governor and missed the nomination for governor in the Democrat Party by 1 vote. But he was a very powerful man. And he lived down here where the Mimosa Inn is today. His house burned down in 1960. But he brought to the state legislature to form Polk County as a new county from part of Rutherford County and part of Henderson County. So he did. And the topographical engineer, his last name was Alexander, he made this map. And when I first saw this map, I loved it because my great-great-great-grandfather, William Metcalf, was right here in this little corner of Raleigh. But the Wrights Creek area, of course, as I said, here's Mills Gap Road, so here, this area at that time, right on the edge. And so the first courthouse was held at Marvel Mills's property in the middle of Mill Spring. This is right at his house, was right at where Mill Spring Baptist Church is, and the barn that he had was used as the first courthouse. But this is what happened in 1847. Some of the people in Polk County, I recently read a letter where the people of Polk County wanted Polk County to remain a county, but there was some fighting going on with several residents in the Mills family, which was one of the most powerful families. We could do a whole program on Columbus Mills alone. So the Mills family, which had several commissioners on the board, and also, you know, Columbus Mills and the state legislature, they went before Raleigh, and they disassembled Polk County. So it went back to Rutherford County and Henderson County in 1847. And it was all due to a lot of fighting, especially about the county seat being in Mill Spring, which was too far away from people, you know, at that time. So, in 1855, however, Columbus Mills went back to the state legislature in Raleigh, and once again decided to form Polk County. So they did. This is the 1847 version of Polk County. As you can see, there's 5 gold mines on here. There was a lot of gold activity going on in North Carolina at that time. And the Howard Gap Road, the Mills Gap Road, and Mills Gap turns into the Green River Road, which goes down into Spartanburg. And there's several families there also. So 1855, once again, Polk County became a county. This time they decided that they would build a new county seat, not an existing town, but in the middle of a field in what is now Columbus. 3 landowners, 3 Johns, John Head, John Newman, and John Nodine. 3 of them donated enough land to make 100 acres of county seat. They divided all those acres into lots that they could sell. So they put the lots up for sale. But the thing about what they did was they advertised that these lots was for sale and are going to be very important lots to buy because the railroad is coming to Columbus, to the county seat. It did not. It was originally planned to come through the mountains here, especially down the Green River Cove area and into Columbus and then down towards South Carolina at that time. That didn't happen. That's another story. But Polk County was formed a second time, and the people here in Wrights Creek, they had their post office in there. Now this is a picture of Thomas E. Walker. He was a very important person here in the Wrights Creek area. As I said, he ran the store, a grist mill, and postmaster, him and his family for many years. When the Civil War happened, he was one of the 24 Polk County men that fought for the Union. there was about 400 or so on the Confederate side. Some of those that fought for the Union, fought for the Confederacy first, left, and then joined the Union. Thomas Walker did join the North Carolina 2nd Mounted. Now, I read a newspaper article about that he went up north and joined the Union. That's not true, because the North Carolina 2nd Mounted was from where? North Carolina, right? And it was made up of North Carolinians that wanted to fight for the Union. And most of it was based in Tennessee, and they were under a Colonel Kirk, not the guy from Star Trek, but a Colonel Kirk that was known as a very bad stammer. What the 2nd North Carolina Mounted, they went on the battlefields at Richmond or Appomattox or places like that. North Carolina 2nd Mounted was really a guerrilla unit. And a guerrilla unit, they would come through the western North Carolina area, they would round up deserters, they would recruit Union men, they'd burn barns, they'd steal horses, steal any kind of valuable thing that they did. Colonel Kirk and his Kirk's Raiders was the 2nd and 3rd North Carolina Mounted. And so Thomas joined up with him, and they didn't know his reputation, but in years to come, he was, Colonel Kirk was known as a scoundrel, especially for all the stealing he did in the homes of Confederate people, Confederate families, which at that time they called them secessionist families. But Thomas was one of there was about a dozen men that fought in that unit, the 2nd Mounted, and it seems like most of those that did were from this area of Polk County, the northwestern part of Polk County, which has always been strongly Republican and is to this day. So, there was a lot of unionism in this area, even though there's only 24 for the whole county. But even in Cooper's Gap Baptist Church in August 1865, after the war, they passed a resolution in their church condemning the Civil War, condemning the secessionists, saying that it was evil and it was a crime against the country and all this kind of stuff. So you can tell Cooper's Gap with that language in their notes that they were really real unionist people. And Thomas Walker was too. I know a guy that wrote a book on Kirk's Raiders, and he studied the Kirk's Raiders really a whole lot and everything. And I asked him one time if he had any stories from Polk County that he ever run across with Kirk's Raiders being in Polk County. And he said he did not. So I don't know whether any of these home folks attacked any of their neighbors up here. Today, you will find them buried in cemeteries next to their Confederate neighbors, and so I hope that they had a healing between the two before they died. But my friend said he didn't know of any incident that did happen. But there was one that was in the 2nd Mounted. His name was John Panther. And after the war was over, Colonel Kirk sent him to Columbus and to round up some of the Confederate Home Guard that had murdered some people. And Colonel Kirk sent him to round them up. In the late May 1865, John Panther was shot by some rebels as he was doing this in the Holly Hill subdivision, which was the Hampton house at that time. If you know what Holly Hill subdivision is. But that, I believe, was the last North Carolina killed in the Civil War. He was under orders, he was in uniform. There is a marker up in Waynesville that said the last shots were fired in North Carolina in the Civil War, but this was 3 weeks later. So I like to claim the last shot in the Civil War up in Polk County, and he was also a member of the 2nd Mounted. But after the war, Thomas Walker was the postmaster in 1874, and there was a Wrights Creek Baptist Church here. There was a Wrights Creek School, which is a picture here that you can see. And the Wrights Creek School, there was probably 30, 35 one-room schoolhouses at one time in Polk County. And, people couldn't travel far, so they had to build a school. And most of the time they were very primitive like this. My grandparents and some of my older uncles that were born in the 20s, they went to school in a schoolhouse like this called the Fort Creek School up in Saluda, and that building is now a house. But this was the Wrights Creek School. I'm not sure, has anybody ever known where this was located at, or anybody ever told you where they think this school was located?
I heard something about it being down around 7, 8 down in there somewhere. Not sure.
Okay, maybe so.
The Brights Creek Baptist Church Cemetery is up between 3 and 4.
Okay. I don't know what that is, but these people do, right? But anyway, so it was a pretty good community, and it had, like I said, a brisk food store and this school. Here's a picture of the school, probably around the turn of the century, and you know, it would be a clearer picture. I got this out of a newspaper article. I wish if they had the original, it would probably look clearer. But you see all these little school kids, you know, I'm looking at, most of them have shoes on, so it's probably in the winter. My dad's generation, he was born in 1938. You know, most of them went to Saluda School in Bare Feet, in the church in Bare Feet. I don't know if Bob did. Bob's kind of more, had more money, their family had more money than Dad did, but Jessica's dad, Bob's, went to school with my dad about the same time. So, but anyway, there's these kids, and you always look at them and say, what was their story and where did they go to? And you know, but this is a picture of Brights Creek School, but it was called Brights Creek School in Walker, North Carolina. And the name changes from Brights Creek to Walker, North Carolina several times. And the postmaster Walker named it Walker, I guess. And then at one time it's just called Wright, no creek, just Wright as well. And then it was called the Deep Gap Farms for a long time. Deep Gap also in the area there. But that's Brights Creek School, and it was closed in 1930. In the late 1920s, the Polk County School Board decided that they were going to work on closing down all these one-room schoolhouses and making all the kids go to a centralized school. Here would probably be no spring. And my uncle Robert, he was a World War II veteran, but he was in Fort Creek School in Saluda when they closed the school down that same year, 1930. And he said they didn't have any buses that could run up on the mountain. This is far from town, you know, like 5-6 miles from town. They didn't have any buses that would run up there. So they didn't have any transportation for the Fort Creek community kids to get to Saluda School. So he said there was a man named Ernest Heatherly that worked for the town every day at the town. He had a flatbed truck, and he built benches on the flatbed truck to carry the school kids from Fort Creek down into town every day. Later on, was he your bus driver? He drove bus from that time when he built his own school bus all the way into the 1980s, right? Yeah.
Maybe bubblegum every day.
Yeah. My grandpa was kind of a handyman, and Ernest Heatherly liked to drive fast. And you know, school buses have what on them to keep them slow, the governor, right? And Ernest Heatherly got my grandpa to take that governor off so he could speed. And he did that for years. But anyway, that's kind of a side story. But these one-room schoolhouses were closed in the 1930s for the most part, and everybody had to go to a centrally located school. And you know, you think about it, I kind of like the idea of a little community school like that better. You know, everybody knows each other better. And, I don't know, it just seemed like more homey to me. But you just wonder how that teacher dealt with kindergartners to high school kids all at the same time, teaching them all at the same time. But anyway, school closed. Now this is Silver Creek School. They just recently tore this building down. Right across from Silver Creek Church, you'll see a guy, he's got a sign out, firewood for sale. You know what that house is? That guy just bought that house a few years ago, and this small Silver Creek School building stood up until just a few years ago. We tore it down, sadly. And we did a tour of Harvard's Cove, River Cove one time. We asked if we could go there. He said no. He was kind of bad about it, but I don't know. People might be friends with him. But this is the Silver Creek School, and I'm going to get to the flood of 1916, I think, next. No, well, anyway, the flood of 1916, a lot of the kids here in Brights Creek had to go to Silver Creek School for a while anyway. But this is the McMurray Hotel. I don't know a whole lot about it. Jessica was asking me about it, and I said, I do have a picture of it. But this is after it is run down. And that was a pretty big hotel, wasn't it? Yeah. And that was along the Mills Gap Road, and it was right on the top of the mountain. As people got to the top of the mountain, it's time for a rest, right? So they had a hotel to stay in before they went on to Asheville or Hendersonville or wherever they went to. And from here to Asheville would probably take about 3 days by wagon or horse in those days. But this was the McMurray Hotel. I do know it was on the Mills Gap Road and on top of the mountain. Jessica says she thinks she knows where it's at, right? Where it was?
Well, we think it's because I think it's on Hidden Springs property. Is that right? Is that what you know about the?
Yeah. So anyway, this is a picture of that hotel and how big it was. You know, and it was deteriorating at this time. But this is 1907, as I mentioned earlier. This 1907 topographical map does not have Brights Creek; it just had Bright on it. So I don't know whether that was the official name or that the map maker made a mistake. Now, I read an article recently that several land documents in the Register of Deeds in Polk County listed their property in Rides Creek instead of Brights Creek as misspelling or what have you. You know, people, they're still making mistakes today, aren't they? But in 1907, it was called Wright, at least on this map here. Now, the flood of 1960, somebody asked me about this. Probably one of the most devastating events that take place in western North Carolina, all the way from Asheville down to here, was the flood of July 1916. And they said that it destroyed much of the things, places around here. It destroyed a lot of the topsoil, which, you know, everybody, even if you had a store or a mill, you still raised crops because you had to. And the topsoil was washed away, and the farmland was not impossible. And a lot of the people left the churches up here and joined Silver Creek Church or Silver Creek School, and a lot of people never did come back. So it devastated this area. Now, one of my relatives that lived in the Green River Cove said the water was so high that it went to the top of their barn. Most all of the railroad trestles from Asheville to Tryon, all of them were just about all washed away. And they had to call in new workers to help rebuild those. Some of the trestles, they put cross ties on the piled up underneath so we could get some trains down the line. But it really devastated western North Carolina. And the valley of 176, Burton Metcalf, my grandpa's first cousin, he was born in 1902. He said that there were only like 3 houses that survived in the valley, right on the Packard River there. And those are the 3 fancy houses at the end just before you get into the town of Tryon. So it really devastated the area a lot. Now this is another thing that was destroyed. This is not Wright's Creek. I just put this as an example of an old grist mill. This was actually owned by Napoleon Hampton Jackson, who was born here in Wright's Creek, part of the Jackson family that was prominent here in the area. But he built this, his family after the flood moved into, not after the flood, but before the flood, moved into Columbus and started a business. He later started this mill, and this is on Fox Mountain Road, and it was completely washed away down there in the valley from the flood as well. But Napoleon is one of the Jackson family that was here. What else we got here? This is the 1925 map that the Board of Education put out, and of course I cut into the Wright's Creek area. It says Wright's Creek Schoolhouse. So it seems like I'm seeing this here that they either rebuilt the school or, but anyway, in 1925 the schoolhouse was back again after it was washed away. The Walker Post Office is here also. And as you can see, it says Bear Gap Road. I don't know if that's in existence at all. There's the Deep Gap Road that goes into Henderson County, and the Mills Gap Road as well. But this is the 1925 picture. Now, one thing about this Wright's Creek area is that they were more connected with Henderson County, which is right on the top of the range here, than they were Polk County. When you read these articles that I recently read this week about people that live there, they did most of their trading in the Henderson County area. You right across this mountain, you come into the Dana area, which is close to Upward Road, where Cracker Barrel is, not too far across the mountain from here. But I don't think there's a road that passes through there anymore. In the 50s, I think they said that there was one that was really impassable. But Henderson County was where the mail came from Henderson County, not Polk County, to the post office here, and then it was distributed to other places in the eastern part of the county. But really associated with Henderson County. And I was reading an article about one person that gave a memory about her dad. Across the mountains, there's a Little Hungry River and creek and a Big Hungry Creek. And said that their dad would go to town in Henderson County, and on the way back, he'd cross Little Hungry, and he said, "I'm getting a little hungry." And he crossed around Big Hungry, he'd say, "I'm getting big hungry now." But the Big Hungry area of Dana is right across the mountains here. As I said, really connected closer to Henderson County. And that's 1925. Now this is a water wheel that was built here. This wasn't a grist mill, it wasn't a cotton mill, but in the 30s and the 40s, a man named Dr. Marion Palmer was one of the founders of St. Louis Hospital, a prominent doctor in Polk County, decided that he was going to buy land up here. A lot of land was in back taxes. He bought land from several different landowners and ended up with thousands of acres, which is part of this development here. But here in the Wright's Creek area, there were no electricity lines, no electricity. Now, my dad was a junior in high school when they ran power lines in the Polk Creek area where we live at. And they went around to the community and said, if you want power, you've got to buy 3 appliances. They gave them a choice of 5 appliances, 3. And I heard one of my relatives in the Green River Cove, just down the line here, said in 1955 is when they ran the power lines in the Green River Cove. And they didn't have any choice of power before that, you know, other than his. So he said that his father and other men in the community, the new power had them clear the right-of-ways, cut down the timber for the right-of-ways in order for them to bring the lines in. So they had to negotiate the power. But here in Wrights Creek, I read recently this week, they did not have any electricity lines up here, no access to electricity until 1962. And you people from the cities, it's hard to believe, but in the towns of Saluda and Tryon and Columbus, they had power in the 1920s. But the rural areas, especially where the poor people lived, they didn't get it until later on, especially in the mountains. So 1962 was when power. So Dr. Palmer, as he was buying all this land up, he started his farm here. He raised Angus cows here. He decided that he was going to get power by making his own water wheel and powerhouse. And that's what this is here. Now, does this still exist, or? Yeah, okay. Wheels. That's Bobby Orman told me there was one up here. So anyway, that's what that was. That was for generating electricity. They had a lot of servants up here, and they would have one servant that they call upon when they needed electricity to turn it on and all that. But Palmer, Dr. Marion Palmer, I think the next picture is a picture of him, bought up a lot of this property. Part of this property was owned at the time by a man named Carl O'Story. And if you were my dad's and my grandpa's generation, that was a cuss word, Carl Story was. You know why? Because he worked in the tax office. And he found out that somebody was foreclosing, and he bought up thousands and thousands of acres in Polk County. He owned land all over the place in Polk County. Most of the Tryon Peak area, you know, where up in that area, owned that. Most of the areas of Lynn, and even up where I live, he owned a bunch of acreage up there. But Carl Story owned part of this Wrights Creek, and of course he was famous for. He started out as a school teacher. He was famous for buying out foreclosed land, especially in the 30s and 40s when a lot of land was forecast. But here is Dr. Palmer. I think he's here in the hat, and some of his buddies at the powerhouse. But Marion Palmer owned the property, raised cattle here, and enjoyed according to their family, they liked peacefulness, and they liked to be away from other people. So they enjoyed the pristineness of this area. But they owned it all the way until 1966. Thousands of acres. And then, this is part of, I don't know whether Palmer built this or the next guy that came, which was Crooks, but this is one of the barns that was in the Deep Gap Farm at this time. That's not an Angus, I believe that's a Jersey cow, but you know, it's a primitive barn that was there. I don't know if that's still here, or any barns left or anything. Okay, and no electricity, okay. I skipped it. Okay, so in 1966 to 1978, most of this property was owned by a crook. That's not his occupation, that's his name, Crook, Dr. Crook. And according to the residents that worked for him, that he invented the nail gun. And then he came from Chicago, had a lot of money. So he bought, according to this, he bought 2,646 acres in the Wrights Creek Valley. He owned this land until 1978. But he was also, they said, a very nice person to be around, but he liked to be alone and didn't really leave much from up here. And owned a lot of property. In 1978, his son sold it to one group of people, and then they sold it to a guy in, I think it was Fort Lauderdale, Florida, that owned it for many, many years, and only used it as a hunting lodge. Didn't really come up here much on occasion. And they said that when it was sold into the developers of Wrights Creek here, that man was paid $17,000 a year in taxes and not using the property. So you gotta have a lot of money to do that. But anyway, this is C.L. Crook. And then later on, this is what I want to talk about now. In the early 1960s, they started discussing building I-26. Did you know that one of their original plans was to come through here with I-26? It was going to come through here, bypass Columbus, you know, go through Mill Spring and into South Carolina, but it would be less steep. These mountains would be less steep than the current I-26, which they had a lot of erosion problems when they tried to build it in the 70s. And they would not have to build that massive ridge on the Green River, because the river would be shorter coming this way from Dana, and it would save a lot of money. And that was the original discussion, that I-26 would come straight from here. Imagine how different it would be then, right? And so, but the politicians wanted to come through Columbus, the county seat. And so that's where it ended up, coming through Columbus, of course. And it was completed around 1976, but in 1969 they built the Green River Bridge on I-26. And when they came from there down below Saluda, there was a lot of erosion on that mountaintop, which there is now, you know, and they're working on it right now. They're doing a lot of projects to try to stop the erosion on I-26. But this was one of the proposed original routes. I don't know how far they got in the planning of I-26. Anybody ever know that before? Yeah, you did, okay. So, imagine that. Now, 2003, Bill Amick and Barton Tuck. 2003, they bought the property from that guy in Fort Lauderdale, his name escapes me, and they bought 4,235 acres and planning to build a Fazio golf course and up to 1,200 lots here. I remember when this came out, I guess I was, well anyway, I was 43 years old, I guess at the time, and this same time period, there was like 5 developments in Polk County that were proposed that had included over 1,000 lots and expecting hundreds and hundreds of homes. And everybody in Polk County said, well, we're not going to recognize this place. But you know what? Just about all of them went bankrupt. You know that? Most all of those big developments planned around this time period went bankrupt, including the White Oak Plantation, which the Trident Equestrian had bought, but there's only a few homes there. That was expected to be a 1,000-acre big golf course and everything like that. Never transpired. But Bill Amick and Barton Tuck built this. Bill Amick, anybody know what his occupation was? Did you know him? Chicken farm. He was a chicken farmer, right? Big commercial chicken business. And so they bought this and they recruited Fazio. I'm not a golf person. I don't know hardly anything about golf. I know that people talk about this is one of the best golf courses around. Is that, am I right? Yeah, okay. And, but anyway, they said jokingly that they were going to have to change the name of Palmer Road to Fazio Road, because Fazio would get mad because they thought it would be named after Arnold Palmer. That's what the joke is. But they bought this and developed it, of course, and in their original plans from this Bulletin article, they said they were expecting to hire 90 people. How close are we to 90 employees here? How many employees you got here, you know?
About 25%.
About 25% of that. They were expecting about 90 people, and you're really expecting real big things. This is going to be the golf course of the future and all that stuff. But sadly, it did not transpire. You know, you all know this place better than I do, but I know one guy from here. I used to visit the museum. Will you? You used to visit the museum? Yeah, you did, right? Yeah. What's your name?
Major shot.
Major, yeah. Major's a funny name. I was trying to remember. He used to come sit with me at the museum all the time and talk about history. But he told me that, you know, that a lot of things just didn't transpire. It looks like you're doing well though anyway. But they went bankrupt, right? And part of the property they sold back. I think Vivian Cersei bought part of her property back. And so then 3 men, and they're here, 2 of them are here today, right? 2 here or 3? Just one? Just one. One of some of the residents here, 3 of the residents here, right, bought the property, right? Was that a good idea or bad?
Well, I'll let you know.
We think it was a great idea.
Yeah, we think it's great, so.
Yeah, that was good. So that was a good favor. But anyway, they bought the property in bankruptcy in Bright Street today. Now, there are several cemeteries here on the property from Palmer Road up. There was an unknown cemetery that nothing was marked. And the company, Ward Cemetery Service in Rocky Mount, they had the Historical Association supervise or watch over the digging up of the graves and the replacing of them. And they gave us, we have this photo folder of the digging of the graves here.
Does it show where it came?
Yeah.
It came from and where
It shows the location was here. I think it was in the middle of the golf course, I believe. And the funeral director told me one time and said, most of the graves 100 years ago, you're not going to find hardly anything, but you will find a different kind of soil. So that is what the remains are when you dig and move a 100-year-old grave or so. And they did find a few hinges and little pieces of artifact. I think that's part of the home there, nails, you know, things like that. Put them all in these little boxes and we buried them somewhere here on the property. And if you want to look at this later on, you can. But you can see the indentation of the coffin there and that soul, and you can see how that was done. But there were several graves. There was the Bright Creek Baptist grave, we mentioned that earlier. This unknown one that I'm talking about was moved in 2004. The Bright Creek Baptist Church has families such as Huggins, Walker, Bradley, Norris, and McGraw. The Jackson family at the end of Palmer Road contains Jacksons and McGraws, including the Jackson family member told me that there was a Revolutionary War Jackson buried there. He didn't know the name, but it was supposed to be, and also a member of the Confederacy in there. There's also the Jones Cemetery on Palmer Road, also somewhere around here. But there is several cemeteries here in this area that are the remains of those pioneers that started the first settlement here in Wrights Creek. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. So that gives you a little information about this area that you now live in. And hopefully you'll honor that history of the pioneers that tamed this mountain and lived here for years to come. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I got one. So I'm always curious, I've been curious about this in Colorado and everywhere, on forests and old growth forests with the trees and the logging industries that have changed the terrain over time. In these areas, including what you know about Polk County in general, Dinosaur, Pacific Creek, but as we look at forests, you know, like down by the tennis court, some of those trees down there, those are phenomenal. And one of the things about this property is we play golf. I mean, it's an amazing place.
Yeah.
But one of the things that makes it that way is the forest. So how close to old growth are some of this stuff as it relates to the logging industries that would have cleaned it out to build and whatever?
I don't know if loggers ever own much of the mountainous, especially these places, World's Edge and stuff, mountainous areas. 30 years ago were owned by paper companies. And a lot of paper companies started, if they were too steep and like that, they started actually giving them to preservation. And a lot of these mountain top ranges that used to be paper company where they did logging, you know, for paper, are now under conservation projects. And that started happening towards the year 2000. A lot of these paper companies would, like I said, they would put them in conservation, and it's hard to do that over some reason, and stop the logging part of it. But the people that own this mountain land, logging was very important to them because they didn't have the flat, huge, farms, and so that was a way that they made money. In my neighborhood up there in the mountains, Polk Creek area of Saluda, they had what you call a portable sawmill, and they would bring this sawmill into different forested areas. They cut down the trees and saw them up into timber right there on the spot. And most of that has grown up now. There's still a lot of people in Polk County in the logging industry, but for generations they've been cutting trees when they need them, and now you see the forests that are up where they once cleared them for timber. Timber was a big industry, and when the railroad came in, they would buy a lot of timbers. I've got a picture of my great grandfather standing there at Melrose with his oxen with a big load of logs. The railroad would buy logs from them and then take them and sell them somewhere else. One of my dad's neighbors, which was a cousin, his name was G.L. Metcalf, and he said when they needed a little extra money, they'd go and take the mule up in the woods, cut down a tree, and take a fro and make it into a cross tie, and then take it down the railroad and sell the cross tie that they had made themselves. I asked him how much they got for it. He said probably wasn't much. But, just if you had lived in the mountain area, that was a big part of your agriculture is to sell whatever you could as lumber and timbers. Anybody else?
One thing I was going to add, there's very little arrowheads or Indian stuff you ever see around here.
Really?
Unlike, like on the Scotts River, you've got areas that have lots of area. So there must not have been too many Indian camps around here.
Yeah, or maybe some of that got washed away in the flood.
Well, like
the topsoil down low. The interesting thing about Polk County, the head of the Wisconsin Archaeological Association, anybody from Wisconsin here? came to Polk County in the early 1900s, and he did studies around the Harmon Field area of Polk County. And he said he estimated there was a village of 10,000 in that area. Now, how can you guess that? You don't know. But there's always been a lot of arrowheads found around there. Of course, being by a river was important for Indian village too. You know, they relied on that river. That's where a lot of the bigger villages were. So it may be this was hunting ground, but not, you know.
You talked about the flood a couple of times. What was it? I'm fairly new here, so I don't know the names other than the green where I do softballs. But what flooded?
Well, just about all western North Carolina. There was a big storm system that came up from the Gulf. At the same time, a big storm system came up from this was in July 1960, from the Charleston area, you know, and they came together. And I think it was 12 inches in 1 hour at one point, but it rained for several days, you know, on top of that, and it just devastated all western North Carolina.
Lake Toxaway was an earthen dam, and it was built at an angle without a spillway, and it overtopped the dam, and it turned the dam to slurry in about 15 minutes. And so when you look below Lake Toxaway, all that scouring of the granite is where the dam turned to slush and the whole lake emptied. A cataclysmic type thing. Asheville was under about 12, 15 feet of water. Like second floors were underwater.
And I think every railroad trestle was washed away. I mean, railroad, which is very important those days. You know, that's the main mode of transportation from Asheville to here. You know, so it was just devastating for western North Carolina.
So they put in a lot of the Azure Dam and some of the stuff, and that's what they, in Colorado, Denver had the same problem. So they ended up, water control now is all, those dams are all managing water.
Yeah, I believe that they did a study on that. Of course, if you were here, what was that? 10 years ago, we had a lot of mudslides, you know, especially around the area around I-26, had that storm where it's rained heavily. He said, that's the worst storm ever. I said, no, it's not. It's a lot worse.
This question may be more for Jessica. If my memory serves me right, Jessica, I thought you had told me back in the mid-19th century that the town or village of Wrights Creek was washed away from high winds and flooding. Were you referring to the 1916
Yes,
incident?
there's some articles that we have about that, about it being in the floods in the 1960s and all the old history that we have.
I'm sorry?
Yes, we have some old history that's recording that, where a lot of it had washed away here.
But you're referring to the 1916, not, okay. When you first told me that, I thought you mentioned like mid-1800s, so I was expecting 1840 to 1860, but, okay, all right.
Is there any gold mine over
Lives on Old Gold Mine. Yeah, he lives on Gold Mine. There you go. Start
If
committing.
you come to the museum, I can sell you this. Hey, if you come to the museum, I can sell you this treasure map for $5. The primary gold fields were here in the Green Creek area, Sandy Plains area. The Carsons of the Green River Plantation were started out like as loggers. They didn't make a lot of money, but then they got into the gold business. They ended up employing 40 people, or part of them were slaves, I guess, just doing gold mining. And of course, most of the gold mining activity was also up in the Rutherford County, what they call the Golden Valley. But there were, on this map of 1847, there's a gold mine, there's a gold mine, and then over here in the Lynn area, off of Horse Creek, there's a gold mine as well. So this was the primary gold area. There was a little bit of Henderson County in that. I don't know if anybody ever looked for gold. But I'll tell you another family story. I love my family stories. My great-grandmother was half Cherokee, and up there in the area where I live, you know, she lived there. She married George Washington Metcalf. And, after both of them had died, she had a relative from the reservation, Cherokee Reservation, that would come in every summer. Sometimes he'd spend the night with my grandparents, when my dad was little. And he'd go up there in that section with my great-grandparents' land, and he'd get gold every year and take it back to the reservation. So, you know, I don't guess there was ever a gold mine there, but there's still, he knew there was some gold up there, and he would come and mine for gold. And then one 4th of July, I was with a couple of my cousins that started going to these tourist gold mining places where they give you a bucket and stuff like that. And he said, well, I bet you there's some gold in the creek. So the creek in front of my house, I tried it one time to me, it was boring. My cousins go in and they're always finding flakes of gold, just about every time that they go, you know, they'll be there for a couple hours. They'll always find not enough to make a lot of money, but, you know, you never know where there is gold, you know. There may have been some here, but now Silver Creek was actually named after where they mined for silver. And down the road here, you know, not where the church is, but on farther down was an actual Silver Creek. I don't know if I can really show it to you here on the map or not, but anyway, Silver Creek, there is a Silver Creek where they mine silver nearby. There supposedly was the same thing down in the Green River Cove somewhere where they had silver. You don't really hear about silver a lot, but that's what the story is about how Silver Creek got its name. All right, anybody else?
The last question would be, who named Bright Creek? Who named it Bright?
I don't know. You know, it was named that in a lot of the earliest maps that you see. So I don't know if there was a Wright family. You know, there's some in Henderson County that have the last name Wright. I don't know if they were here or not, but
Or whether the Indians did it?
huh?
Maybe the Indians named it.
Maybe, yeah, maybe, or maybe it was just shiny and bright. I don't know.
It's because of the silver mines here, Frank.
All right, anybody else?
My understanding was that this, we're on our third owners here. Is that true? I didn't know. We've only lived here for a little bit.
Your current owners was?
Current owner, we're on the third set of owners for the property.
Yes, he's one of them. He's one of them right there. Yeah.
And that's all well fine. So where have we gone from back then to now? Percentage wise, do you know?
That would be a question.
What was the
Your
question?
growth, what is the growth since you took it over? The growth percentage?
Pretty good. I mean, we're definitely probably had 17 houses. We had about 40 houses when we kind of took it over. We got probably 57 now, some under construction.
And that was and that's compared to the original, that's compared to the original plans of 1,000 homes here.
Well, yeah, and eventually, I mean, that included all the what they call the hidden spring property, which is around us, but it is still, approved by the county to have eventually
Yeah.
1,200 homes, but that might, I won't live on that.
Okay.
Okay, so, any other questions? Next month, Kathy, which Kathy?
Yep,
Next month, I'm coming again, right?
yep.
And I'm gonna be talking about the Revolutionary War in all of Polk County, not just Bright Creek, but the rest of Polk County. There's a lot of interesting stories about the Revolutionary War. And, so I'll be here in April, the same, what's it, the third Thursday?
25th, I think the 25th of March, I think.
25th of March. I'll be here on the 25th of March, and I'll be talking about the Revolutionary War in Polk County. And we'll have some interesting stories. Now, of course, I went to the Polk County History Museum. I'm the chief guy. If anybody's